Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and I'm going to do another one of those Q&A videos. I think I'm going to try to do one every two weeks. That seems like a comfortable schedule for me. I have a podcast every 2 weeks, and I'll do this every 2 weeks, and that way it doesn't get overwhelming for me. And I think every 2 weeks I have a good number of questions to choose from that I think might be interesting to hear the answer. You know, questions that people ask that I think might be interesting to hear my answers to those questions. And of course, if you disagree with my answer, you got something you want to add, put something in the comments, and everybody can read and argue about it. And you know, if it's worth bringing up again, I'll bring it up again if we haven't beat it to death in the comments section. So I was really happy with the response this had last time. So yeah, let's see where it goes. Okay, so let's get started here. First question is from Dave. He asked, is there such a thing as too much wood? I think this is a Facebook question. Is there such a thing as too much wood ash on the garden? I'm assuming it adds potassium. Yeah, of course. The one thing that wood ash is higher in than anything else, in fact, is calcium. It's my understanding. I looked up a number of it before I started putting it on, and this is my advice to anyone, before you're going to do anything on your garden. I tend to gravitate towards the university agricultural extensions for my information. I'm not a master gardener. I've never taken a course on gardening. It's just trial and error and reading. And I find those resources to be the more reliable because they're sort of accountable to their other faculty and colleagues and so on and so forth. So I tend to gravitate toward university extensions as resources. So if I want to know something, I tend to just on Google, I'll look for wood ash. I'd say wood ash space extension, and I look at all the things that come up. Michigan State University Extension, Wisconsin University Extension, Vermont University Extension, right? And those university extensions will put out articles that aren't overly academic in nature. I have an academic background. I can read academic articles, but the great thing about the extensions, they take up a 20-page journal article or research from various articles, and they'll boil it down to like a one-pager, so you can get your answer pretty quick. And it's just one-stop shopping and easy to get. And it's just if you want to go deeper, you can. But anyway, wood ash is higher in calcium than anything else. So you can put too much in your garden because it can make your garden alkaline if you put too much on. If your soil is overly, one thing, a safe thing to do is to do a soil test and see if your soil is acidic. The pH is below 7. Notice it because a lot of research suggests that slightly below 7 is actually fine for most vegetables, like 6.5, 6, that sort of thing. I wouldn't sweat it if your soil is slightly acidic. Certainly where I live in Nova Scotia, Canada, it's kind of notoriously acidic here because we catch all the acid rain coming off the mainland, coming off the continent, sort of thing, for other reasons as well. Yeah, if your soil is really acidic, it's a way to bring that down. And if your soil is at just the right pH balance, then you could actually make it alkaline, make it higher than 7. And that might affect certain kinds of plants, their ability to take up nutrients and achieve really good growth. So my general rule of thumb is I just put a little bit everywhere. I have a wood stove, so I have ashes, right? And I put it kind of everywhere. I don't concentrate. I don't add all kinds of it to my garden to increase the potassium levels or whatever. If you were going to think about, according to the University of Vermont, if you were to think of wood ash as something like a fertilizer, the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium balance would be 0-1-3. So if you were laying it on your garden to add potassium to your garden, remember that you're adding all kinds of calcium as well. So I wouldn't use it for that. Generally speaking, if you cover your garden with a mulch every year, that mulch is going to feed your soil and it's going to get everything it needs. The main time of year I put wood ash on my garden, and the only reason I put it on my garden is because it's a byproduct of my wood stove. If I didn't have a wood stove, I wouldn't bother with it. I wouldn't go around the street begging neighbors for wood ash. I just wouldn't waste my time with it. But I've got it, so I figure I might as well use it instead of throwing it in the trash. So I put it all over my lawn, and I put it everywhere in the garden. But I save it for the garden, and I put it on the garden when around late March, when there's snow everywhere, and I want, excuse me, and I want the snow to melt because the wood ash is dark. And so around, I don't know, March 20th or March 15th, I just sprinkled it around. And I don't put, like, the rule of thumb they give at the University of Vermont Extension is 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. So I've got a 2,500 square foot garden, so I could technically put 50 pounds on. I don't put anywhere near that. I'd say I'd put maybe a quarter of that. I mean, I put enough on to make the snow dark gray, right? So I don't put, like, the other rule of thumb is they say is a ½ inch. I don't put anywhere near that on my garden. I just put a dusting everywhere. And same with the lawn. I just dust it around until it looks almost like, you know, if you're putting pepper on a, you know, you got some mashed potatoes and you want to, the way you'd put pepper on your mashed potatoes. Oh, okay, I got enough pepper because I can, you know, it's liberally, you know, you don't put ½ inch of pepper on here. So that's the way I do it. So I don't worry too much about, do I have too much or too little or too whatever. I find my soil is just, because I keep everything covered all the time with mulches, and I use different kinds of mulches all the time, that feeds the organisms in the soil, and they turn all of that material into all the things my plants need, and it all just takes care of itself. You know, I throw a little bit of wood ash on there just because I've got it. If I didn't have it, I wouldn't use it. Okay, so that's, I hope I answered your question on that. Yes, you can have too much, so I wouldn't be laying it on. And of course, I put it on when there's still snow on the ground, so a lot of it, a lot of what's in the wood ash is water soluble, so it just attaches itself to the snow when it melts, and it just goes, you know, down into the soil and kind of just stays with the water if it's water soluble, right? So I don't know how much of what's in my wood ash actually benefits my plants. I've got it, so I use it. And I mean, lots of people always say, oh, that adds biochar and that sort of stuff. And I guess there's some benefits to be had from biochar. I've never really understood why people are so excited by biochar. It would never dawn on me to go in my backyard and burn a whole bunch of wood so I could have charcoal to throw in my garden. That just seems like a waste of an energy source to me. And, you know, not a very good reason to cause you know, all that smoke and sort of pollution. Doesn't make sense to me to burn wood to get biochar to put on your garden, despite whatever benefits it has. There's more benefits to be had by just keeping your soil covered and keeping the organisms in your soil happy so that they can benefit your garden. That's my take on that. Next question is from Chuck. He says, your Hugelkultur raised beds are awesome, but domes over them raise a question. As I understand it, normal rainfall replenishes the moisture content in the logs beneath the soil, and that includes winter snowmelt and winter rains. But don't the domes prevent winter replenishment of the log reservoir beneath the soil? So let me just repeat that last part of the question, because that's his main question. Don't the domes prevent winter replenishment of the log water reservoir beneath the snow? The answer is no. No, they don't. You got to remember that in my gardens, the logs are actually beneath the grade. Imagine this is, the dome is above, let's say my hand is grade, the dome is above grade, and the logs are below grade, right? And whenever it rains, even though the rain hits the dome and goes, you know, around the dome sort of thing, it hits the ground and it falls into the ground, and there's a water table, right, beneath grade. I drew a little diagram here. We're going to try to do this. Is a really bad diagram and really bad graphics, but hopefully this helps. And I tried to label this, but I used my kids' like crayons and stuff like that, so it's kind of low budget. But anyway, you got the dome, and of course everything's backwards here, so forgive my fingers. But there's the dome, there's the box, and there's the logs that are beneath the grade, right? You see this sort of this line here is grade, or everything's backwards here, right? And this is soil down here, right? And so when it rains, yeah, of course the rain doesn't go directly down to this, but the rain goes down through the soil, and in this area here, the water doesn't, you know, the water just goes underneath the box. Basically, there's a, this is what you might call the water table, right? There's, the water gets down there. I got another diagram down here, you know, like you've got soil level, and you've got the sort of loose soil on top, and then as you go down, the soil gets harder and harder and harder, and water accumulates along that hard layer and just sort of runs along you know, that hard layer. So you do get a kind of well effect. Also, the dome creates a kind of microclimate and a kind of a closed system, right? When you have a sunny day, the moisture in the soil evaporates, hits the dome because it's cool outside the dome all winter long. It just rains back down. So it's kind of there is moisture loss. I'm sure there's gradual moisture loss in the soil here, but it's constantly being replenished. And also underneath, right, when it rains, the water goes, I'm all backwards here. When it rains, the water goes down and it goes underneath the garden, right? So yeah, it's always wet underneath there. I got a garden that I just planted, what was it, midway through the week, Wednesday, I planted parsnips in one of my domes. And I believe that one's a Hugelkultur bed dome. And it's been covered since December. And the soil was moist at the top, like the top layer of soil. The soil had a mulch on it. And it was the bed that had that video I did a few days ago, or last weekend, I guess, where I had a couple beds with garbage bags, and I showed one that didn't have garbage bags, but it had grass clippings and seaweed, and it had completely thawed well ahead of schedule. I still got beds that are frozen out in the garden right now, even. So it was the bed that had completely thawed without any garbage bags, the last one I showed. Anyway, I sowed parsnips in that midway through the week, just recently, and the soil was still moist, right? It wasn't like, you know, sopping rain and wet or anything like that, but it's not like it was a desert in there, right? It has been covered, so literally that soil hasn't been directly rained on since December. And we had a lot of rain in December, January, February. We really didn't start getting snow till March. I mean, it was still in double-digit below zero type, you know, cold winter, but we would have days where it got up above zero and rained all day. But the rain goes, you know, around the dome and down into the ground, and it goes underneath, right? Just like if you flood your kitchen, you know, let's say you put the plug in the sink and you turn the tap on, and then when your kids start fighting downstairs, so you go to, like, you know, you're filling up your sink, so you put the plug in, you turn the tap on, and you hear your kids screaming, so you run downstairs to deal with that, and you forget all about the sink, and then you hear this dripping sound, and you go upstairs, and there's water all over the floor because your sink is filled up and overflowed, and the water doesn't just stop there, right? It goes everywhere, and it goes down, and it just follows gravity. So it'll follow gravity, it'll go down below, and it'll just find its way underneath. And because the logs also, they've got that sponge-like quality and a capillary action and so on, they have an affinity for water and they take it on. So no, it'll be fine. You can put a dome over a Hugelkultur bed, and it shouldn't dry over, at least where I am, it doesn't dry over the winter. I hope that helps. Boy, I'm only gone through 2 questions here. I might have to do 2 of these videos. The next question is from Monica. She says, I have an idea and I've been stuck looking for solid info. I know you did a how to make Hugelkultur bed video, but not much info on ideas on anything and everything on what to plant each year and how to care for it in more depth. For instance, I read after the first years, you chop everything and dress it, then plant for 2 years and see what pops up from year 1. I'd like to have several types of Hugelkultur beds: herbal, medicinal, for the birds, bees bed, veggie, and berry beds. So she's basically saying, how do you maintain your, to summarize and make that a little more succinct, how do I maintain my Hugelkultur beds, and what should I plant in them, right? Let's start with how to maintain them. Just keep the soil covered with some sort of mulch, whatever you've got. Whatever you've got that'll stay on and won't blow off. Sometimes a combination of things is good. I like to use leaves. I like to use hay. I like to use seaweed. I like to use grass clippings. Basically, whatever I can get for free that's not going to blow off. And if you're going to use leaves, I find big leaves tend to blow off. So if you get big leaves, let's say I tend to pick up leaves on my way home. People put them out on the day before garbage day. So if I open up the bag when I get home and it's got big oak leaves, for instance, I just run over it with my lawnmower and make them smaller. Because the big leaves, if If you think of a leaf like a sail, they grab wind a lot more. It's very windy where I am. So if you're worried about wind, everything I'm doing in my garden is a test ground for wind, because we have wind here, trust me. I'm there by the Atlantic Ocean, it's windy. I mean, half my videos are voiceovers because it's just too windy to film out there. And things blow around all the time. My domes are tied down, because if they weren't tied down, they just blow off into the trees, right? So it's windy here. So that's the first question. Just keep them covered. That's how you maintain them. That'll replenish the soil, right? And that'll keep the soil moist and keep the organisms in the soil happy and just keep everything happening for you. What to plant in them? I just use them like any other garden bed. I tend to rotate things, right? So let's say I've got a row of Hugelkultur beds. You know, whatever I planted in this one this year, I'll plant that in the one adjacent to it the next year, and then I'll move it over one the next year, move it over one the next year, and whatever's over here, I bring it back over here, sort of thing. You know, general families of vegetables should not be planted, and there's people that argue that it doesn't matter, but I find I get better results when I do this sort of thing. So like potatoes, peppers, eggplant, they're all the same family. Tomatoes, right? All those things are the same family. So if you plant any one of those things in a given bed, then you don't plant that sort of thing in that bed the next year. So the next year maybe you plant kale, or some sort of brassica, right? A green like that. And then the next year, right? So you just keep moving them over. So I don't tend to like doing the same thing in a bed year after year after year. So I move things around. Now, if you're asking about perennials, just make it a perennial bed and grow your perennials there. Yeah, for the birds and bees, I don't plant things for bees because like my garden is in the middle of a field which is surrounded by a forest, and there's bees everywhere all the time, and I've never really understood the concept of growing things for bees. I mean, if you're a vegetable grower, just about every kind of vegetable you grow, except greens, because you pick them before they flower, but all the things that flower, tomatoes, squash, corn, all of those things benefit bees, right? Anything that produces some sort of fruit, beans, peas, all those things benefit bees because they all have flowers, and the bees pollinate them and do the nectar. I've got apple trees, right? I've got different blueberry bushes. I've got all of those things benefit the bees. So for me, it's not worth, if I've got good, productive, cultivated land that I can grow something I can eat in, that's what I would do with that. I don't bother with bee balm and stuff like that. I've never understood. I mean, if you want to do that, that's great, but I don't see it as a necessity, because there's flowers everywhere in my garden and all around my garden, and the bees love all of them, and the bees are happy. I don't need to do extra things for the bees, right? The bees are good. So maybe it's different if you're in an urban setting and there's even in that setting, I wouldn't think so, because in lots of urban settings, there's ornamentals everywhere, roses and things like that. I think there's plenty of things for bees. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here. Use the beds like you would anything. And if you want a bed to be a perennial bed, then just put your perennials in it and keep it mulched, and they'll come back every year. And if you're using it for vegetables, just rotate a bit, right? So I hope that helps, but you just go about using them like you would any other sort of bed, right? If you're planting vegetables, you just rotate a bit, right? Whatever you plant here, just plant it somewhere else next year, and plant it somewhere else the next year. Keep things moving around. I hope that helps. Next question is from Julie. This was in response to the video I did called I'm Still Eating Food from Last Year's Garden. I did that about a month ago, I guess. She says, what is your recipe for a zucchini relish? And she also says, I love your videos. This is my recipe book here. I just write down my approach for recipes as I look them up online. And if I like the results, I write them down in my book. And if I don't like the results, I don't write them down in my book. So this is my recipe for sweet zucchini relish. So get out your pen. I'm not going to type this out. If someone wants to type this out in the comment section, that'd be really beneficial to everybody else. I'll go slow here. And I'll make little side notes as we move along here. And this makes about 3 quarts if you get a quart jar, right? Number one, 13 cups of shredded, unpeeled zucchini. And I really don't measure it out like that. I've got a Cuisinart, and I just feed the zucchini through it. And I've got like a large bowl, like a salad bowl. And when the bowl's, kind of full, that's when I stop shredding it, right? I just keep shredding it, and I fill the bowl. When the bowl's full, I stop. But if you want to be exact, 13 cups of shredded zucchini. So 13 cups of shredded zucchini. Don't have to peel it. You want to leave the peels on because it gives it a nice color, and you get all the nutrients that are in the peels and all that stuff. Of course, you want to clean it, right? 4 cups of chopped up onion. I just feed the onions through the same way I do the zucchini, to shred everything on the same setting. 5 tablespoons of pickling salt. 1 red bell pepper, 1 green bell pepper. You don't have to use a red one and a green one. You can use 2 red ones or 2 green ones. It doesn't matter. And you can even just skip the peppers. It's nice because it gives it a little color, but you don't need the peppers for it to be good relish. I do a relish that's just zucchini and onion with no peppers, with yellow zucchini, because my wife likes the relish to be perfectly yellow. So, right, you don't have to follow this exactly. You want to have the onions, and you want to have the zucchini, but the peppers, that's just an aesthetic thing. They don't, they add a little sweetness, I guess. There's an advantage to that, but you don't have to have them. 6 cups of white sugar, 2.5 cups of white vinegar, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, 3/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, 3/4 teaspoon of ground turmeric, 1.5 teaspoons of celery seed, and 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. Okay, so the nutmeg, I would say, is optional. I don't even go that exact with these things. I use a teaspoon of ground turmeric when I think about the last time I made it. You got to have the turmeric. It gives it a nice sort of yellow. It just seems to add the right flavor to it, the turmeric. The celery seed is nice to have as well, and the pepper is nice to have. Nutmeg's a taste thing. It's nice. I put the nutmeg in. It's nice, but if you don't like nutmeg, don't add it. That being said, I think if you put 3/4 teaspoon of nutmeg in 3 quarts of relish, you probably wouldn't notice it that much. But anyway, so first step. It's not like you just put all that stuff in a pot and heat it up. You don't do it that way. This is the important part of doing a relish, okay? Tomato chow, you use very similar steps. If you've got a recipe and it's just ingredients and there's no instructions, this is a very important instruction. You shred all that stuff. You shred all of the zucchini and the onion, okay? You put it in the bowl, and you mix in all that salt, all 5 tablespoons of pickling salt. It's that coarse pickling salt. That's not iodized, okay? You mix it all in really good, and you let it sit overnight, okay? And what happens is that salt will draw out all the moisture from the zucchini and just change it. Just change its composition and just change its nature, I guess. And the next day, you take all that zucchini that's been soaking in the salt, and you're going to find there's like a layer of water. It's good also to put a weight on top. Maybe put it like you mix all the salt in, put a plate on top, and put a rock or a brick or a frying pan or something like that on top to get it all weighted down. Just so that everything is in contact with the salt. And what you'll find when you look at it in the morning is it'll be sort of underwater. That much moisture will come out of the zucchini. So you take all that out of the pan, maybe you get a fine strainer or some cheesecloth or however you can do it. Squeeze all that moisture out and put that moisture. So you can save that. So all that liquid that comes out is basically like salty zucchini water. And you can use that in your cooking as a salt. It's basically salt water with a bit of zucchini flavor. So if you don't want to throw away all of that stuff, you can use it to salt your dish. You're making pasta, instead of putting a teaspoon of salt in your pasta dish, you just put a couple tablespoons of that salty zucchini water in. So that's what I do. I put it in a mason jar and put it in the fridge. And every time I need salt over the next week or so, I use it. I mean, it's not going to keep indefinitely, but try to use it whenever you need salt, right? That way you're not throwing that away. Okay, so you've squeezed all the moisture out, and then you put that in a pot and add all the other ingredients in the pot and bring it to a boil in a large pot, and then simmer for about 30 minutes. right? And then once it's simmered for 30 minutes, you put it in the sterilized jars and can it, right? You know, put it in sterilized jars, put the lids on, submerge it under water, bring it to a boil for, I think the rule of thumb is 10 minutes or something like that. Then it's canned, right? Or if you're going to eat it right away, right, just stick it in the fridge. You don't have to can it if you're going to eat it right away. You know, if you bring it to a boil and put it in a jar and put it in the fridge, if you can somehow eat 3 quarts of relish in a week or 2, it'll be fine, but I would can it unless you're going to give it all away and give people instructions not to stick it in their cupboard. But if you can it, of course, you can keep it in your cupboard indefinitely. So I hope that helps. That's the recipe for sweet zucchini relish. Next question is from Palm Tree Lee by the Sea, and she, I don't know if it's a she actually. The question is, can you share more about vegetarianism, plant-based eating? Thanks. So first off, I'd say I'm not a vegetarian. Okay, I don't know if I certainly don't pass myself out. Maybe because I have such a huge garden, people just assume I'm vegetarian. I'm not. I am convinced that plant-based eating is a good way to go. That is to say that you should have plant food to be the majority of your diet. I think it's cheaper, it's healthy, it's good for you. From everything I've read, keeping the animal-based portion of your diet as low as possible is probably the better way to go. I am completely lactose intolerant, and not by choice. It just gradually happened to me over time. I found myself unable to have milk and ice cream and stuff like that. And then eventually I couldn't have yogurt and cheese anymore. And I think 2011 I had to give up butter. I was down to, I don't know, by the early 2000s I was down to butter and Parmesan cheese. I could still have that. I think 2011 was the last, Christmas 2011, around that time of year was when I said, okay, I'm off butter and I'm off Parmesan cheese, because every time I had it, I got stomach pains and stuff. So I gave it up. I fought tooth and nail to hang on, and I gave it up. And my body just doesn't want it. And I know every time I mention this in my videos, people say, take Beano, take this pill, take that pill. My body doesn't want it, so why would I take a pill to force it back in, right? You don't need it. You absolutely do not need it at all. It's kind of a myth that you need it. You don't need it. I haven't had anything like that for years, and I get my blood work done every year, and everything's fine. So you don't need milk. In case if you're on the fence, or you're having difficulties, or you get sort of pains or other problems when you have milk products, and you're pumping yourself full of pills to sort of hang on because you think you need it, you don't. You'll be fine. I mean, I think the hardest part of giving it up is it just tastes so darn good, right? So, for me, the discomfort and the pain was such that it wasn't worth it. It didn't make it worth eating for me. And you save a lot of money. You know, when you switch from drinking milk all the time to water all the time, you save a lot of money. And if you're trying to lose weight, it's a great way to lose weight, because instead of drinking fat and sugar all the time and adding various sources of fat and sugar to all your meals, you just stop doing that, right? And I think I used to have a coffee. Every time I had a coffee, I would add milk to it. Actually, I would add cream, and I would add sugar to the coffee. So all day long in my office, I'm basically running sugar and fat into my body and over my teeth. And then when I went completely lactose-free, I didn't like the taste of coffee with just sugar and no cream, so I just went totally, that's what I got right here, black coffee. What do you know? Less cavities, right? And you're not drinking sugar all day, so it's got to be good, right? Just lowering the dose of sugar, getting that out of your diet, it's got to be good, and it's cheaper. So anyway, the question wasn't about that. I just got off on a tangent there. So I'm not a vegetarian. If I were to go in that direction, I think I would go completely vegan. But I have a wife and I got 2 kids, and I would have to bring them all along with me, and it would be a big fight. And when you're in a marriage, you just sort of, I like I'm making this sound like they're the ones holding me back. I mean, I had bacon and eggs for breakfast. I like that stuff. There's many reasons I think it makes sense for everyone to reduce the amount of animal-based food in their diet. And I don't know that, especially certainly what we're doing here in North America, I don't know if it's sustainable going forward if you read about it. And I think anyone that makes that change is probably doing their planet a good thing. And I am certainly doing everything I can to bring that all down. It's also just cheaper. If you take the meat out of your diet, you save a fortune. Especially if you're growing most of the vegetables in your backyard, right? It's even cheaper. But even if you're buying everything at the grocery store, it's way cheaper. And it's a myth that, fresh produce, it costs so much. No, it doesn't. Depends on what you buy. I mean, if you're buying the most expensive fruit and vegetables from the most exotic lands, yes. But if you're just eating things like cabbage, turnip, carrots, potatoes, like a lot of those things are pretty darn, if you're thinking about per weight, right? Just go in the grocery store and look at here where I live in Canada, a lot of things in the grocery store, it'll tell you the price, right there when you're buying it, it'll tell you the price per 100 grams often. So you can compare everything, and you look at the price of most meats, it's like high, and you look at the price of most vegetables, and it's low, right? So, I mean, there's only so much weight of food you can put in your body, and you're actually spending a lot less per pound, if you want to think of it that way, or per kilogram, if you're filling your body full of vegetables. And the other added thing with vegetables is that, a good deal of what you're eating is just water and fiber that's basically kind of going to go at the other end, right? You're going to get the water you need, but a lot of what you're eating isn't going to be gathering around your waist, to put it that way, right? And you'll still get the protein you need, and you really don't need, I think it's overstated the amount of, I don't have the figure off the top of my head now, but the amount of protein you need every day to keep your body going, to keep yourself healthy and strong, it's small. It's not like, think about how much tissue do you think you need to repair? Certainly once you're an adult, you're not growing anymore. You're just maintaining your body once you're an adult. So how much protein do you think you need? I mean, that's mainly maintaining all that stuff, right? Most of what you need is, vitamins and nutrients and sources of energy, right? Carbohydrates and that sort of stuff to keep you going. Fats and carbohydrates, so you don't need a lot of protein. Anyway, I'm not a diet expert and I'm not a diet guru, and don't take it on my word, look it up. Anyway, I'm getting way off on a side note here. The point is that no, I'm not a vegetarian. I do think a plant-based diet's a great way to go, and that's pretty much where I'm trying to steer my family and get us on that path as much as possible. All right, so next question. We got, who is it now? Ecocentric Homestead, and this was in response to the video I did very recently about the garden cloche. It says, with germination inside, the thing I think about is that the seed germination temperature depends on soil temperature, and optimal germination temperature is often greater than optimal growing temperature. There's a number of questions here, so I'm going to answer them all in stages. So the first thing here was optimal germination temperature is often greater than optimal growing temperature. I don't know that that's correct. If you think about in nature, just about everything germinates before the height of the growing season, right? Just about every plant has, when the seeds germinate in the spring, it's cooler than when they're growing, which is in the summer. So, and for a lot of plants, like, I don't even know what optimal means, but if you're inside, you're probably around room temperature, maybe slightly higher, somewhere between 20 and 26 degrees Celsius, you're germinating things at. Whereas at the height of the summer, it's going to be, 30 something or more, and it's going to be hot. So I don't know that optimal germination temperature is higher than optimal growing temperature. Certainly, I germinate everything outside. So, like right now I've got parsnips, spinach, and lettuce outside, and they can germinate, I think, at degrees, soil temperatures as low as 5 degrees Celsius, right? There are some plants that can germinate at like 5, I'm just going to use rough boundaries here, but some plants can germinate around 5 degrees Celsius, the soil is that temperature. Some can germinate around 10 degrees Celsius, and some can germinate, some need a temperature more like 15, right? So things like squash and beans and tomatoes and stuff like that, they like the warmer temperatures, like 15 degrees Celsius. But there's other things that can handle cooler temperatures when they germinate. So that's my answer to the first part of the question. Continues, would it be good to germinate seeds inside and then plant them out when the seedling gets the first true set of leaves? I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that question. I'm certainly not an expert on germinating things inside and then moving them outside. I do everything outside. The reason I'm using their cloches is I'm going to put the seed in the ground outside underneath the cloche. About a month before the date when it would be safe to plant something like that. About a month before it would be safe to move that out. I got a podcast coming up next weekend with blogger, YouTuber Lee Reich, and he has a book on a book called Weedless Gardening, and he has a table in that book that says when to plant things out that have been transplanted in. And I've actually taken that table and put it into Excel, and he and I both are I've sort of gussied it up and made it do automatic things and fancy schmancy stuff. I'm going to make that table available on my website, so is Lee Reich, and you can download that table and stick it on your computer. You don't need to be you don't need any skill in Excel at all. As long as you can open the file, double click the file and it'll open if you have Excel on your computer, and you can use it. And that file will tell you for every single plant from A to Z sort of thing, when to plant, if you start the transplant indoors, when to transplant it, when to take it out safely outdoors. So stay tuned for that. That'll be like a week from now, like will that be April 6th or something like that. So stay tuned for that. Any more? There's more to this question. With the cloche, this is the same question continued from Ecocentric Homestead. I would assume that planting them out when they get their first set of true leaves would go very well. I don't know, you'd have to harden, if you're going to plant them out from being inside, you'd have to harden them off first, right? So you'd have to harden them off and then move them to the cloche. And you'd want to have the cloche, because you're planting them out from being inside, you'd want to have the cloche on about a week before you put them in the ground to warm up the soil and everything. But again, the whole reason why I think these cloches are great is that I think you can direct seed using them, right? If your soil's thawed and let's say it's still getting, you still have a risk of frost, but the cloche should protect the plant from that, depending on where you are and how cold it can get at night and so on. But for me, it's worth the risk. So I'm going to be direct seeding under the cloche, and we'll see how it works. I mean, I'll record the whole thing this year, and you can see how it goes. But if you were going to be planting out, if you had a transplant inside and you were going to plant it out under the cloche, I think it'd be a good way to, gently introduce that plant to being outside. But you still need to harden the plant off before you stick it under the cloche, or it's just going to bake in that thing, right? So you still have to harden it off. It doesn't get you out of that thing. And hardening plants off can take a week or more, depends on what kind of sun you have and so on. I hope that helped. Next question. This is from Karen, and it's about the video I did back in October 2018. It was called How I Deal with Pests That Eat Kale. I think it's a video where I show that I use BTK and a pyrethrin-based spray called Safer's End-All, provided by my sponsor, Safer's. So she says, since pyrethrin is a form of chrysanthemum, would companion planting work? So I think what she's getting at is, instead of spraying this pyrethrin-based Safer's End-All, is basically this liquid spray, and you spray it on your plant leaves, and if it comes in contact with a wide range of pests, it kills them. And it probably also makes for a very short amount of time, it sort of, it breaks down fairly quickly, like 24 hours, I think it's sort of gone. But for a short amount of time, I would imagine it would make the taste of the leaves sort of undesirable to pests. I find it works really, really well for flea beetles, more so than anything else. It'll work for whitefly, but I find the BTK is the best thing for the whitefly because it's, or what they call cabbage moths or cabbage maggots. the BTK is the best thing because you're putting it on the thing they're eating it, and they eat it and then they die, right? And it's very pest specific. It only kills that pest, and it breaks down basically, in a very short amount of time. You can't even mix it up with the water. It breaks down in the water. So I mean, it only kills caterpillars, and after about a day, it doesn't kill anything at all. It just becomes ineffective. So it's a very benign, pest-specific treatment. I had some guy dog me on YouTube, calling me a bee killer. I mean, BTK doesn't kill bees, dude. I got in a big... It wasn't a Twitter war because it was on YouTube, but I got in a big fight with this guy about this thing. He's like, I'm spraying it on greens. Bees aren't eating greens. Bees like flowers, and the things I sprayed on, I'm not, it's not like there's an airplane flying over my garden, covering the whole thing in pyrethrin, right? Or BTK. I mean, all I do is spray kale and, plants in that category that don't have flowers, so the bees are totally safe. Anyway, the question was, what she's driving at is, instead of spraying that on the kale, for instance, what if I interplanted my kale with chrysanthemums? That's an interesting idea. I don't know that would work. Certainly, the pests wouldn't bother your chrysanthemums, it's likely, right? But that doesn't mean that they're not going to say, oh, this doesn't taste good, but that thing right next to it tastes great, right? There's an idea that interplanting confuses pests, and maybe it does to some extent. I've done a lot of trial and error, because you read a lot of permaculture gurus and articles that say, oh, interplant, it confuses the pests. I'm telling you, I've interplanted and everything has just gotten eaten to pieces. Like I've interplanted, I even have videos of me advocating for this, where I've got garlic and I say, hey, the pest comes in, it likes the garlic, it flies away and leaves the kale alone. And maybe if you haven't got a really serious pest problem, maybe in some circumstances that works. I certainly felt like it was working in my garden, and then one year it didn't seem to work at all. Like I had garlic interplanted in with my kale, and the kale were just, everything was attacking the kale. So yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in interplanting, right? I don't see why. It's just like you, if you were sitting at a dinner table and there was a bowl of ice cream, and that wouldn't work on me, but there's a bowl of ice cream and right next to it there's a bowl of arsenic. You'd eat the ice cream, you'd leave the arsenic. Oh, that's arsenic. Or there was a bowl of ice cream and a bowl of hot chili peppers. You might, oh, geez, I don't like that. But the other thing, the ice cream doesn't look anything like the hot chili peppers. The reason that the spray works is that you spray it on the thing they like. So they go to eat the thing they like, and they're like, oh, something's wrong here, this is not good, or they die immediately, right? So it works. You're basically giving the kale a chrysanthemum property by spraying chrysanthemum essence all over the kale, right? So that's why it works so well. So I hope that answered your question. Safe for Zendal, there's also another one called Trounce. I've used them both. I find they work great. There's a coupon code in the description box below if you want to order any of those products, BTK or Trounce or Endol. They all work great, and they're all, to my satisfaction, acceptable types of pest control implements to use in your garden, because they're made from natural things, and they break down, and they just don't sort of persist. You're not building up heavy metals in your soil and so on and so forth. All right, next question. This is from Paul North. This is from, I did a video back in November 2017. It was called How to Build a Hugelkultur Style Raised Bed Garden. He says, avoid woods with tannins. Also, don't put in dead, cut, poison hemlock. All woods have tannins, and I cover everything with leaves all the time. Leaves have tannins. I think what he might have meant to say was avoid woods that are high in tannins, perhaps. And there's some evidence to suggest that if it's really, really high amounts of tannins, that affects the plant's ability to take up nutrients. But tannins are also water soluble. So it's fairly rainy where I am. So I mean, the water comes down, and some of the tannins in the wood are leached into the water, and then the water continues following gravity to go elsewhere. The water keeps going down and it goes away, sort of thing, right? So, yeah. I've got things in my garden growing beneath wood chips, which are full of tannins, right? Made from, a lot of the wood chips in my walking paths where I've planted beans and stuff like that are made from pine, pine, which is high in tannins, right? And everything grows fine. So pine needles and pine wood chips, all those things have tannins in them, right? If you take a bunch of those things and put it in a garbage can and fill it up with water, the water will turn into a brown tea-like color because of the tannins. So it's possible that there's some concentration of tannins that's not suboptimal, or maybe even be bad for plants. But certainly when I was building my Hugelkultur beds, you can watch the videos, I just throw in whatever dead trees I've got. They're mostly spruce and pine and things like that, sometimes maple, sometimes birch, and leaves, which have tannins. Basically everything I throw in there has tannins in it. And I really don't worry about it. I mean, all of those things, as they rot, they're going to be eaten by various organisms in the soil. And through the magic of all of that, when it comes out the other end of the organism, it seems to be just good stuff. So I hope that answers your question. Maybe I'm being a little bit unsophisticated here, but I really don't worry. I'm sure there's some things. You want something that's going to rot and break down. Like, it doesn't really grow anywhere near me, but there's a tree called locust that apparently you could stick in the ground and it'll last 100 years or whatever. I mean, basically what you're putting in the ground underneath your bed, it's supposed to break down. That's the other point. The other point I wanted to make, very important point, is that the best wood to use underneath your Hugelkultur bed is rotten wood, right? It's wood and ideally wood that's been laying on the ground for a long time. Not a dead standing tree, but a tree that's laid down and it's rotten. That's the best stuff to use. And if it's been laying on the ground for years and years and years, a lot of the tannins have already leached out of it, right? So another reason not to really, if it does have tannins in it, most of them have already leached out anyway. And you'll notice that all around that rotten tree, even though there's all these tannins, there's stuff growing everywhere, right? So I think that stuff just, for the most part, takes care of itself. And there's basically tannins in just about everything I use in my garden. I'm sure there's some concentration that's not good, but whatever that concentration is, I have not hit it by not caring. But the best way to protect yourself against all of that is to just use really rotten wood, which people like to throw away. If you live in a suburb, they have dead trees, dead stuff like that. They take it out to the curb. So they're basically giving you the good stuff anyway. I hope that helps. What else? Got two more questions here. Three more questions. One is from City Shep, from a video I did back in June 2018 called Planting Beans in a Mulched Bed. The question is, how do you keep your hay? I get this question a lot, actually, about leaves and hay. How do you keep your hay from blowing all over the place? I used hay in my garden last year and the blasted wind blew it all over and even covered the rows I planted, thus smothering a lot of seeds from germinating. Okay, that's a good question. And as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, I get a lot of wind, so that's certainly an issue here. Number one, let's make a distinction between hay and straw. Right? Straw blows all over the place. Hay is finer and it tends to clump better, right? So if you're using straw and it's blowing all over the place, find a source of hay. Or if you're using straw, take the straw and distribute it all over your lawn and run over with your lawnmower with the bag on your mower if you've got that if you have that. It takes a bit of work. But by doing that, you're going to make it finer. And it's going to get some of your grass mixed up and that sort of thing. It'll make it more clumpy and more wool-like and less blowy, to put it that way, right? So that's one. Step one is don't use straw. And if you have to use straw, mix it in with other things and run over with your mower so that it's smaller and it's more aggregate. It sticks to itself better, right? Same thing for leaves. If you're getting big leaves, throw them all over your lawn and mow them, and then it'll make them smaller pieces and they won't blow around as much. You think smaller would blow around easier, but they don't. They stick. The other trick, there's three tricks. One is mowing stuff. Another thing is to just use things that clump well. So hay tends to clump. When you put hay down, hit it with your hose on like that fan setting, and somehow by spraying water all over the hay, it's almost like you're packing it together. It somehow glues the hay together. I don't really understand how, but it does help. So that's another trick. Same with leaves. Another thing is, you'll notice most of my gardens have borders of some kind of box or rocks. So by having a border, that sort of, the leaves might blow a little bit one way or the other, but they hit the border and they stay in place. So that helps. There's one more point I wanted to make. With leaves or hay, another way to keep it from blowing away is to just put a couple, like long poles. Like if you got some, if you notice in my garden, I have a lot of these long, like foot-long stakes that I use for trellises and stuff like that. Just lay a couple of those down and they'll sort of hold it in place. So there's some tricks for that, right? Really, the mower thing is probably one of the best ways, because it just gets it all mixed together, makes it more aggregate. All right. This next question is from John Hazaris. He says, this is for the video I just did last week. Which beds are still frozen and what trick worked best? He says, I'm trying to understand how your leaf mulch turns into soil and how long it takes. This is a bunch of questions here, so we'll go through each one in turn. He says, the mulch with seaweed and grass looked more broken down, but unless it cooks at a very high temperature, the grass seeds will germinate at some point. So I'm going to answer that first part of the question. I never worry about weed seeds germinating in my mulched gardens. Never. They do sometimes, they don't sometimes. I just don't worry about it, okay? I guarantee the temperature in any of those beds was never high enough to kill the weed seeds. One thing about the grass, I'm mowing my grass before it's high enough to go to seeds. There's not a lot of seeds in my grass, but even when I'm using hay and other stuff like that, I just don't worry about it. You'd be surprised how few of the weed seeds actually germinate. I can't speak to every kind of mulch you can use, but I use hay from a stable, spoiled hay, all the time. And as I'm working with that hay, there is seeds going everywhere, right? Like thousands of seeds a second going everywhere. And if you took that hay and shook it all over the ground and then scraped it off and left the ground bare, you would have a field growing there. But for some reason, a lot of those seeds, as long as the soil is covered, they just don't germinate. I don't really understand it, but the nature of those kinds of seeds, if there's like 3 inches of mulch above the seed, it's just not going to germinate. Or maybe it does germinate, but it just can't get through that. I don't know, but I'm always amazed at that. If you left it long enough, the mulch would get thinner and thinner and thinner and break down, and eventually the seeds would germinate and get through. There'd be some seeds that survive that whole process and germinate. But as long as you just keep adding and keep it covered, they won't. They just don't seem to germinate. You watch my videos. I'm covering everything all the time. I never worry about any of that stuff, and I'm always throwing millions of weed seeds everywhere every year. Seems to work out fine. So next part of the question, do you turn your leaf mulch into the top layer of soil to help it break down and feed the worms? Otherwise, I know it would just blow away in my garden. No, I just put it on top. If it's underneath the dome, of course, the dome keeps it from blowing away. Also, my gardens, you'll notice the box is higher than the soil level, right? So I'll have a box that's maybe 6 inches high, and the soil is usually only about 3 inches high. So there's like a little border. So that does keep things from blowing out of the box, and it's I'd be surprised if where you are is more windy than I am. I'm very close to the Atlantic Ocean, and I don't mean a harbor, I mean the coast is a 10-minute drive that way, right? So, and it's extremely windy here. To give you an example, if you drive down my street right now, with the exception of people with steel roofs, you're going to see roofs with the shingles blown off, including mine. I lose a few shingles off my roof every single year from wind. So it's windy here, right? It's by the Atlantic Ocean, and we get a lot of wind. And yeah, I find Also, depending, it's the type of leaf too. The big leaves, like oak leaves and maple leaves, they'll blow all over the place. I can't keep those in place. So you got to run over those with a mower. Certain kinds of leaves seem to stick better. The best thing you can do with leaves is, like I just explained, broadcast them across your lawn and mow them. And what's going to happen is you're not just going to get the leaves are going to be shredded up a bit, but also some of that grass is going to mix in. And some of the grass, of course, has more nitrogen than the leaves, but it'll also make the mulch that results from that is a very sort of sticky mulch that stays in place a lot better. It's just a little bit of work, but think about all you're basically in one turn feeding your soil, reducing your need to water the soil, feeding the organisms in the soil, keeping the weeds under control, right? You're doing a lot, so it's worth spending 5 minutes with the mower with the bag on. Or you mow it, if you don't have a bag, just mow it and rake it all up. It's a bit of exercise, but if that's the mulch you have to work with and it's big enough that it's going to catch wind and blow away, taking a mower to it will make a huge difference. All right. What's the rest of the question? Another thing he says, leaf mold takes a very long time to break down by itself. Maybe your microclimate is wetter and things break down faster. I think it's 6 of one, a dozen of the other. 6 of one, half dozen of the other where I am, because it is a fairly wet area here because of our proximity to the ocean, but the flip side of that is it's not very warm, right? For things to break down, you need moisture and you need heat. So you've got moisture, but we don't have a lot of heat. In terms of breakdown, I don't turn anything in. You got, let's say this is the soil and this is the top layer, right? And you got your mulch on top of the soil. Where the mulch is in contact with the soil, that area is where all the action is happening. The mulch is perpetually breaking down because there's things that are like in that area that are working on the mulch. It's perpetually breaking down slowly. And I don't really worry or care about the speed that it's breaking down at. All I know is that it is breaking down because I bring, I bring a ridiculous amount of material into my garden every year. Leaves, hay, seaweed, stuff like that. And it's not like it's growing, right? If anything, things are going down, right? So all that stuff breaks down. I basically add about every single bed in my garden gets from 3 to 6 inches or more. Like potato beds, I'll put like a foot of hay on top, right? So every single bed in my garden gets anywhere from 3 to 6 to a foot of mulch every year. And then I have to get new mulch every fall because all that mulch is gone, right? So it breaks down, right? And you don't need to till it in. So I hope that answered all your questions. Leaf, I don't even know... People always talk about leaf mold, and I just put leaves on my soil. And I'm sure somewhere in that pile of leaves there's something called leaf mold, but I don't really produce leaf mold as a thing, right? I just have leaves as a mulch, and it's perpetually breaking down. So I'm sure somewhere in that pile of leaves, the stuff on the very top is just leaves, and the stuff on the bottom is compost, and somewhere in between in that process there's something called leaf mold, but I don't really have a thing. I don't have like buckets of leaf mold. I just have leaves. And they're breaking down, and I suppose they're becoming leaf mold en route to becoming compost. All right, last question. Janice, this is a Facebook question. She says, I got some 6 garbage bins of fresh horse manure late. This is a good question. 6 garbage bins of fresh horse manure last fall. It's been sitting in my compost pile ever since. I don't know where you live. I don't know if it's cold all winter where you live or whether it's hot all winter where you live. Anyway, she says it's been sitting in my compost pile ever since. So what would that, let's say she got it in November, so that'd be November, December, January, February, March, April. So it's been sitting in a pile for 6 months, 5 months, 6 months, give or take. Right now the pile is under snow. This question is just from a few days ago. Oh, okay, she's in zone 4B, so she's somewhere colder than where I am. Right now the pile is under snow. Will that manure be considered composted when the snow melts in a couple of weeks, or still hot? I'm wondering, since it has only been in cold temperatures. I'm in zone 4B, Canada. thinking of using it in a potato bed like you did last year when you built there's a video I did where I said let's build a potato bed in 6 minutes or something like that. It would have been back in June or July 2017, I think is when I made that video. It's a very fast, short video. So number one, it's not about time. It's about how hot was that pile of manure all winter long. It wouldn't have composted where I am here because we didn't have any snow accumulate. We had these double-digit below zero nights, and then it would rain during the day, and then it would get freezing cold at night. So it would have, where I lived, that would have just been a giant block of ice all winter long, and it wouldn't really be that much further along. Now, let's say I'd put that big pile of manure down and it just snowed on top of it, layer after layer after layer, even if it was a colder place like a Zone 4B. If it's been covered with snow all winter long and it's never been exposed and it's just gotten more and more layers of snow, it probably was cooking underneath there. But even then, I don't know. It's not a time thing. What you got to do is go look at that manure and have a look at it and see what it looks like. The manure there should be no visible sign of anything being green. When it comes out of the horse, you can still see grass, right? So it should be dark brown. It should smell like if you go in the woods and pick up a bunch of dirt in the woods, it should smell like sort of dirt. It shouldn't smell like pee, right? So it should be dark brown. It shouldn't have that urea smell. And there shouldn't be, ideally, there shouldn't be any pucks, those little brown circles. I think we all know what those are. But there shouldn't be any of those pucks. Ideally, they're all broken down. That said, even if there is pucks, if you break them open, they should be dark brown, black all the way through. If there's, let's say you've got these dark brown pucks and you open them up and they're green on the inside, you can still see sort of grass that hasn't composted, then it still needs to sit. If you want to be, if it's really, really well broken down, there's no pucks or nothing, or if you got some pucks and it's still dark brown all the way through, you could plant those in potatoes. You do run the risk of using manure that's not fully composted with potatoes, of bringing various problems into your potatoes. So if you're completely confident that it's completely broken down, go for it. I've grown lots of things in manure and I think it works great, but it's got to be broken down. If you're not completely confident that the manure is broken down, you can still grow in it. I just wouldn't grow potatoes in it because you're running risks. So I would instead grow something like squash, like a pumpkin or any kind of squash, right? Because they're not putting a root vegetable in the ground, they're going up and above the ground, right? So, I mean, you can take all that manure and put it in a bed and get a little area where you're going to put your seed and sort of push that aside a bit and put some just good soil there, right? That isn't manure. And put your seed in that and let it germinate. And cover the whole thing with mulch, right? Or ideally cover the whole thing with leaf bags and newspaper or something. I mean, if you're putting a whole bunch of horse manure in a garden, you're going to get weeds growing in there like you wouldn't believe. So, okay, let me step back. Put it in your bed. Cover the whole bed with your manure. Cover the whole thing with paper or cardboard or leaf bags or any sort of paper, right? Something that's going to last about a month before it breaks down. And then punch holes about this big, 3-4 inches in diameter in that. And put a bit of, good soil in there, like some compost or, just something from just soil, right? Like fertile soil that isn't semi-composted horse manure. Put that in that little circle hole, put your seed in there and let that grow, right? So now all the weed seeds aren't going to grow because the whole thing's covered in paper. Your squash, a squash or tomato or something like that, that's a heavy feeder, that's very pest resistant, that's going to grow up and not down in, right? So I would do squash or tomatoes, right? Ideally squash because tomatoes and potatoes are the same family. So squash, put it in the hole, let it grow, and then next year that's your potato garden, right? Yeah. I hope that answers your question. I hope it gives you, of course, if I didn't answer your question thoroughly, just put another question in the comments. Maybe I can come back at it next week. Jesus, like a 50-minute video. So anyway, I hope that answered all of your questions. And if I didn't get to your question this week, I'm sorry. Those are just the ones I thought were sort of would require a long-winded answer, and I didn't want to type out the answer. And this is just I think it's a better way to go about answering viewer questions than writing 20 essays a week, right? So I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out the offers from my sponsors in the description box below. Vessi Seeds and Safest Gardening Products. There's coupon codes that you can use to get it. If you want to support my podcast, help it grow, support the YouTube channel and help it grow, and they're selling something that you need for your garden, buy it from them, and that'll help me continue my relationship with them, and it just makes all of this easier for me to do. So until next time, get out there, get at it, keep the questions coming, and geez, it's almost April, so get out there and get at it. Thanks for watching.